Brilliant. Yeah, I'll only take up sort of 15 minutes or however long you want to talk. But yeah, we're just looking to do a feature article, just sort of catch up with some ex-fighters and just kind of get some reflections on your career and just sort of see where everyone, see where you've ended up after fighting and what life's been like. So yeah, thanks for stopping by.
Oh, thanks for asking me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries at all. So I guess if you wouldn't mind, could you tell us about your sort of background, your early life and that sort of stuff, as much as you're comfortable with?
Yeah, well, I was born back on the East Coast of the United States, the Northeast. I was the child of immigrants. My dad and my mom both immigrated to the States in 1952. My dad came from Germany to Switzerland to the States, and my mom came from England. I was raised for about most of the first 14 years of my life in Connecticut. That's where I first started martial arts training when I was like 12 or 13 years old, and went and lived for a year in Montana. Went back to Connecticut for about another year, and then went to Minnesota. Lived there for a couple of years and went and joined the Marine Corps. Was gone for 4 years overseas and in Southern California. Moved back home to Minnesota, resumed martial arts training there in 1979. Since then, I stayed there until December of 2004. From there, I moved down to where I am now in Kansas City, Missouri, right in the middle of the United States. Been training pretty much my whole adult life in martial arts of one sort or another, but mostly in Okinawan karate and weapons. Been involved in MMA since my brutal introduction to it in UFC 2 in 1994. After that, I started seeking out training in different things that would complement the MMA side of things, and in my mind, to make me a more well-rounded martial artist and a more well-rounded fighter, and even more importantly than that, to make myself a more well-rounded person and a better instructor. I felt strongly that if a person was going to teach somebody and say, I'm teaching you self-defense, but ignored certain realities of fighting, then you weren't being honest, and you were giving people a bad bill of goods. And I don't want to misrepresent myself and say, oh, I'm teaching you these wonderful arts that will make you, so tough and you can fight anybody. But say, for example, if they go to the ground and they don't know what they're doing, then I failed them. So after UFC 2, then looking around, I saw that that was something I needed to personally get better at. And so I sought out different wrestlers and jiu-jitsu guys. And, back in the early to mid 90s, there wasn't a whole lot of that around. Everything was fairly new. There was judo and there was wrestling, but the Brazilian jiu-jitsu and that kind of thing, especially up where I lived, was hard to come by. I lived in a very remote area, very rural area. And so since then, I've been doing whatever I could to continue with my base, which is the Okinawan karate and weapons, but then add to that different areas. And also for me, MMA was a way to test myself under pressure, under fire, and to see what my reactions would be. It was a good challenge, because back in the old days, if you trained in martial arts, you were training because you were probably going to have to fight and defend yourself, or your job was to defend the king or the royal family. And so you had opportunities to test yourself under fire. In this day and age, if you go out and test yourself under fire, you end up in jail, because you should not go out and fight other people. So how do you know how you're going to react when someone's trying to hurt you? Are you going to be able to deliver your techniques? Are you going to be able to stay calm? MMA was a great way to do that, I thought. And so that was, to me, another big reason why I kind of morphed into that side of things.
Absolutely. Sounds good. So how did you get started in martial arts in the first place? What drew you to, to getting started?
Like many other people, I was tired of getting my ass kicked and being scared all the time. And back in the late 60s, early 70s, martial arts was coming into the public eye a lot in the States. Bruce Lee was becoming popular. Martial arts movies, kung fu movies were all very popular. And so I naturally kind of gravitated to that. It was just one of those things where I thought, well, that'll make me a tough guy and I won't get my ass kicked so much. And maybe I'll even be able to kick somebody else's ass once in a while.
Yeah, absolutely. And so how did you then find yourself fighting at UFC too? How did that come about?
That was an interesting story. A lot of twists and turns to that. I didn't know anything about UFC one until one day one of my students came into the dojo and said, "Hey, here, look at this article. You've got to read this. This is something that you should do." And I read this article about UFC one, and this guy about my size named Hoist Gracie, beat everybody pretty easy. He won, I think the UFC one, he won $50,000. I thought, well, I could sure use $50,000. And I had been somewhat active in karate tournaments. I hated them because the rules were crazy. You couldn't hit somebody in certain targets. You couldn't hit somebody too hard. You couldn't, do this technique or that technique. And several times would get in trouble for inadvertently breaking those rules by hitting people too hard or throwing them when out of the area. And so I never really liked to do it. I did it to support other people who were promoting these tournaments. But a few times people come up to me and say, well, you should really fight full contact because your style is kind of given to that. And when I read the article about the UFC and there was almost no rules, I thought, well, this would really be a good way to do what I talked about earlier, to test myself, to see, how I would react under those kind of circumstances. And so I gave it some thought, and then I decided, well, I think I'd like to try this. So I wrote a letter to Art Davie, who was one of the founders of the UFC, and asked him if I could come down for UFC 2. He wrote me back and said that he already had the full card and he didn't need anybody, but he would get in touch with me for a later UFC. And less than 2 weeks before UFC 2 actually happened, I got a phone call on my answering machine, said, "Hey, this is Art Davie. Ken Shamrock broke his hand. He can't compete. So I'm going to take one of my alternates, put him up in Ken Shamrock's place, and I want you to come down and I want you to take the place of the alternate." And I called him back a couple of days later because it was on the weekend, and said, "Hey, yeah, I'd love to do it." I said, "Well, how under what circumstances would I get to fight?" And when I had read about UFC 1, I saw that the two alternates fought in what was like a preliminary fight. And I said, "Well, I get to fight the other alternate." And he said, "No." He said, "UFC 2 is a 16-man tournament instead of an 8-man tournament. So we don't have time for that." He said, "The only way that you're going to get to fight is if before fight night rolls around, if somebody doesn't show up or if somebody is sick, then I'll put you in their spot." He said, "If everybody shows up and everybody's healthy," he said, "then I won't need you." He said, "So you'll just be basically getting a trip to Denver and you get to watch the show." So I said, "Okay, fine." He sent me the tickets in FedEx because it was, by the time we had all these discussions, it wasn't much more than about a week and a half before the fight. And he wanted to make sure I got the tickets in time. And that's how I ended up there.
Right. And what was the process for gaining entry into the UFC? Was there did you have to sort of prove your sort of martial arts credentials, or was it literally just whoever, if they could find a willing participant, then you were in?
I think probably the latter. I just I wrote a letter, told him in a letter, this is my name, this is my rank and my karate style, and these are the kind of things that I train in. And there was no tryout, there was no video that had to be sent. You pretty much could say whatever you wanted to say, I guess. I was honest. I told them exactly who I was and what my background was, but there was no real vetting process, I guess, especially at the late entry that I was going in, because there was really no time to do anything beyond that.
Yeah, that's true. And tell us about your experience at the event itself and the fight itself. I've read recently that they had you sort of as a like a backroom marshal to start with, and then you got a tap on the shoulder. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's pretty accurate. The UFC was on a Friday night back in those days, and Thursday night we had a press party, and Art Davie came up to me and he said, "Hey," he said, the last guy finally showed up, and so we're not going to use you. We won't need you. Thanks a lot, and I'll get you in for another UFC because I appreciate you coming down, and I like the way you handle yourself, and we'd like to have you involved with the show." And he said, "Just come to the show tomorrow night, enjoy it, and I'll don't call me, I'll call you," kind of a thing. And so the guys that were with me and I went to the show. Everything was really chaotic because it was supposed to be in this very nice arena called McNichols Arena in Denver, and they got denied the use of that arena and had to scramble and find another place. And it was a place called the Mammoth Event Center, and it was on Skid Row. It was a terrible place. It was literally Skid Row, where there was addicts and drunks passed out and staggering around. And the place was small enough that there were no real changing facilities, warm-up areas for the fighters. So everybody was scattered around. They rented a hotel across the street that was terrible, and some of the rooms didn't even have doors on them, and there was drug deals going on and prostitutes and everything else. And so when everything was getting underway, Art was going crazy because he didn't know where everybody was, and he had to get these fighters up and ready to go down to the cage in time for the pay-per-view to keep going. And so he said, "Hey," he says, "you know who the fighters are, you know where they are." He said, "I need you to do this for me. Can you help me out?" And I said, "Sure." So I was going down. He would tell me which fighter he needed. I would go down and get them and bring them up. And he just, I had just brought up the Japanese guy, Minoki Ichihara, to fight Horace Gracie. And I was going back down to get the next one and get them ready. And Horian Gracie was coming upstairs and I was going downstairs. And Horian grabs me by the arm and he says, "Are you ready to fight?" And I looked at him, I went, "Huh?" And he goes, "I need you to fight. Hamaker hurt his hand. He cannot fight, so I need you to fight." And the guy that he was talking about came with Gerard Gordeau, who had fought in UFC 1. His name was Frank Hamaker, and he'd fought Thaddeus Luster in his first fight. He won, but supposedly he hurt his hand. And nobody had ever said, "Hey, it might be that somebody wins their fight but doesn't continue, so we'll put the alternate in." Nobody told me or anybody else that I'm aware of that might happen. So all of a sudden here he's saying, "Hey, I need you to fight right now." And so I just said, "Yeah, sure, I'll fight." And I went to try and find my guys and get my gear and find a place to warm up. And it was, I don't know, maybe between 10 and 20 minutes, I imagine, between the time that he told me and the time that I was walking into the cage.
Wow. And what's your recollection of the fight itself? Obviously, the result didn't go the way you probably would have hoped on the day. But how did you feel in there? And tell us what you remember.
It was pretty spotty. Mentally, it was very difficult for me because I wasn't prepared. I wasn't thinking about fighting anymore, and everything was chaos around me. I didn't have time to really get warmed up and to get focused. And I'm a person that does, for me, being in front of people and cameras and crowds is not something that I'm used to. I'm kind of an introvert, and it was very difficult for me to get focused. And I remember, excuse me, I remember walking to the cage. I remember the camera in front of me going backwards. I remember the artificial smoke. I remember going into the cage, and I looked across and I saw Johnny Rhodes over there. And I don't remember too much of the particulars of the fight. I remember getting hit over my left eye, and my eye immediately lost its vision. I couldn't see anything out of that eye. Everything turned white. And I remember trying to wipe the blood away from my eye. And I remember thinking, well, that's stupid. Blood's not white. It's not blood that's in your eye. And then I thought, well, I bet my retina's detached. And so I was trying to make some time and keep some space to try and hopefully get my vision back. And I remember being propped up on one elbow and having a hand up. And I took no end of shit for that. You know, on the internet, everybody thought that anyway. And then I remember at the end of the fight waiting to walk out of the cage. And that's really, as far as the actual fight, that's about all I remember. It took at least a couple hours before the vision came back into my eye. And it was several years later, during an eye exam, they took pictures in the back of my eye. And the doctor was, oh, he says, I see something. He said, I think you have macular degeneration. He said, but it's funny, it's in that eye, but it's nothing in the other eye. And I said, could it have been from trauma, from a blow? And he said, well, did you ever get hit that hard? And I laughed. I said, yeah. I said, I did. And I explained to him what happened and how my eye reacted. He said, I'm sure that's what it is. He said, but we're going to keep an eye. We're going to make a picture every year and see if it grows. He says, if it grows, it's macular degeneration. He said, if it doesn't, he said, that will be what it's from. He said, but I'm pretty sure that it's from the blow. And that's what it turned out to be. So my one souvenir from UFC 2 is a scar on the inside of my eye.
Nice.
Well, at least if I had a scar on the outside, I could look cool and say, yeah, man, I got this in a fight.
Yeah, it would be nice to come out with a few cool scars or something, wouldn't it? But yeah, something invisible like that's probably not exactly what you're after. So how did life change after you participated in UFC 2? Did you was there more sort of attention? Did you sort of change the way you trained, or tell us about that?
Oh, it turned out to be a lot of attention, and none of it was the kind that I wanted. I got a lot of negative press. I got a lot of very personal comments directed at me. Back in those days, the internet was pretty brand new, especially, like I said, I came from a very remote area, and I didn't get internet until 1997. I didn't even have an email address till 1997 when I was working for one of the school districts. And so I didn't see a lot of the things that were going on, but one of my friends who lived in Seattle was very active on the internet and with computers. And he said, hey, he said, you might want to check this stuff out. It's pretty bad. And there was a website that was put up that was mocking me. A lot of chat rooms were making a lot of bad remarks about me, a lot of which were personal. Criticism is okay. I've always been of the opinion, if you put yourself out there in the public eye, and if I would have been willing to accept the accolades if I was successful, I have to be able to, on the flip side, if I'm not successful, accept the criticism. And that was fine. Criticism is okay. But because it was so personal and so vehement, and it lasted for so long, I could never understand it, and it was very hurtful. I've had a lot of other things in my life that have happened that were very traumatic, and this always seemed to get worse whenever other things of a more serious nature were happening to me. And so a lot of times the combination of all of the things that were going on were a lot to bear, and it caused me a lot of problems. I did change the way I trained too. Yes, like I said in the beginning, I sought out different people, different ways of training, different styles of fighting, to make myself more well-rounded. I figure I had two things that I could do. I could either go home and hide and ignore it, pretend it never happened, stay in my own little cocoon and make excuses and be angry and bitter, or I could put on my big boy pants, be a man, admit that I failed, figure out why I failed, and figure out how to make myself better. And like I said in the beginning, to make myself a better martial artist, to make myself a better fighter, make myself a better teacher, and make myself a better man. And so I chose to go that way instead of the other way.
Fantastic. That's a good way to go. So we'll get to your sort of, I know you made a comeback sort of further down the line, but in the immediate aftermath of UFC 2, did you have any desire to fight again, to maybe compete in another UFC event, to sort of test yourself again, or was that something you wanted to put to bed?
No, I wanted to go back. I actually wrote Art Davey a letter and said, hey, remember you told me that you were going to bring me back for another UFC. I'd like to come back and try and, do a better job. And I never heard back from him on that. And no hard feelings. Art, from the first contact through every other contact that I've had with him over the years, has been fantastic to me. He treated me well. He never misrepresented himself or the UFC or anything. He's been very kind to me. He's been very complimentary, very respectful, and I've got no complaints about it. I figured probably what happened is the UFC just started to really get very popular. And I think in the beginning, they were having trouble getting people to compete. And all of a sudden, they had the opposite problem. They had probably so many people to choose from that they didn't really need me, especially because obviously I did very poorly. And there was probably really no driving desire to bring me back. It wasn't like I lost a close fight. I got thrashed, I got handled, and so why bring this guy back when we've got all these other people to choose from? And that's just a theory. I don't really know. Yeah. There was another event, a gentleman named Clyde Gentry III. He's an author. He wrote a very good book on the history of MMA several years ago. One of the first, comprehensive books on the history of MMA. He was involved with a magazine called The Ultimate Athlete, and through that magazine, he was promoting a show, and I was going to go and fight for him on his card, but some personal things came up and I wasn't able to go do that. It seemed like every time I tried to make attempts to go back, something always got in the way of it. So I kind of let it rest for a little while, and then until 2009, I had another fight.
Yeah, so we're going to get to that actually. We fast forward to 2009, and you made a comeback at the age of 53 at a local event. What was the motivation sort of behind that, and how did that come about?
Well, the motivation, a lot of people said, well, you're trying to redeem yourself and this, that, and the other thing. And in a sense I was, but I wasn't trying to redeem myself in anybody else's eyes, because I've got no control over how people see me, people's opinions of me. I can't control those things. I needed to do that for me, because I from the time that fight ended, every day it haunted me. And it didn't haunt me so much that I lost. It haunted me because I lost in such a resounding way. I know I'm better than that. I know I was better than that in 1994. And to myself, I wanted to go out and represent myself in a way that win, lose, or draw, I could be at least a little bit more proud of. I could hold my head up and say, yeah, that was more me. That's more who I really am. And I wanted to represent my teachers, my style, my family, my students, everybody. I wanted not that anybody that was close to me ever said or did anything to make me feel bad. Quite the opposite. They lifted me up and they comforted me and they helped me get through it. But in my heart, in my mind, I felt that, I let these people down because, they had confidence in me. They believed in me, and I went out and I laid an egg. I mean, it was terrible. And for me, I wanted to put that to rest. I wanted to get that off of my back. And the only way that I could figure to do it was to have another fight. And there was a local show in Minnesota. Brock Larson, who has fought in the WEC and fought in the UFC, was a friend of mine, and he was promoting the show. And I said, hey, have you got room on the card for me? And he got very excited. He said, yeah, absolutely, I will. And I didn't even know who the opponent was going to be. Didn't care, didn't matter. I just wanted to get in there and put on a better representation of me. And I trained really hard. I was 53, and that sounds pretty old, but I'm 65 now, and I don't feel old. I didn't feel old at 53. I had really good training. I was in great shape. I had some real good guys pushing me. I brought in a couple of wrestlers. I didn't bring them in. They actually were people that I helped train, and they helped train me for this and pushed me in areas that I wasn't comfortable with. And conditioning is something I've always prided myself on. And so I took care of the conditioning on my own. And I was as physically as ready as I could have been. Some people were a little bit afraid, and they said, hey, what's going to happen if you go in there and you do poorly again? And I said, you know what, that's a chance I'm going to take. Because last time I didn't know what to expect, and I let it throw me. Now I'm a lot more mature now. If it doesn't go my way and I do poorly again, I'm prepared for it, because the last time was a surprise. There are no more surprises. It's just something that I'm just going to go and do. And I had good support. And luckily, I had a good outcome of the fight. It still didn't go the way I wanted it, because in my mind, I had it all drawn up. And I think every fighter probably does. I'm going to go in there. I'm going to show this. I'm going to show that. And I'm going to look smooth and sharp. And I'm going to all facets of my game. And after I got in there, it was like, oh man, I better just get this. I better just get this thing over with. Quit fooling around. But the walk up to that cage and everything leading up to that was way harder than the fight. And I'm not saying that because of the opponent at all, but for me, the physical part of getting ready was not the hard part. The physical part of the fight was not the hard part. The hard part was the anxiety of doing this again, of walking that walk again. And I'd have flashbacks of the way things went before, and it was, and I would keep telling myself that this is something you've got to do. And I've always been a person that believes in facing my fears and facing my issues and my problems and not hiding from them and figuring out ways to overcome them. And this was the only way to do that. This was the supreme challenge for me, was getting to that point of walking into that cage. After that, then that was not the hard part. The hard part was the getting there.
I guess in the way it was sort of the culmination of 15 years worth of heartache in a way. So yeah, to put all that to bed, there was probably a lot of pressure in your own mind to perform on the night.
Right. That was where the pressure came from. The pressure came internally, because nobody else was putting pressure on me. I had unbelievable support. People found out that I was going to fight again, and I got messages from people that were really motivational and very uplifting to me, because for about 10 or 12 years after UFC 2, all I did was get kicked around on the internet and in social media It was, like I said in the beginning, I couldn't believe how strong it was and how long it lasted. I just wanted it to go away, and it never seemed to go away. But then it turned almost abruptly, and I got way more support than I got negative. And that, that
Must have been a refreshing change, really, from the previous
yeah,
time
yeah.
out.
I've learned how to not let other people and what they think of me affect me, but I hadn't learned that back in those days, because all of the negativity and the personal nature of it, really, I let it push me down. Where I think if something that happened to me today, I'd be able to shrug it off a lot easier. But like I said, I'm a lot more mentally mature as far as not letting other people's actions and opinions of me, you know, affect me like that. I don't give people that kind of power anymore.
Yeah, that's good. So how did life change after the fight then? Did you feel a sense of relief? Was it like a monkey off your back in a way?
Yeah, it was a big relief. I felt like I could breathe again. I felt like I could move on now from what happened in UFC two. Um, it wasn't like I went back to the UFC and had a successful fight, but I faced my fears. I got back in there, and at least this time I wasn't ashamed of myself. And and people said, "Well, why are you taking this chance on that second fight?" And I told them, I said, I would rather die at 0-2 than 0-1. And they looked at me and said, "Why?" I said, 0-1 means that, especially the way it happened, that I got my ass kicked, and I went away, and that means I'm defeated. 0-2, at least I went back. At least I showed I wasn't scared, and that I faced my fears, and I went back, and I had the balls to try it again. And so 0-2 I would have been happier at 0-2 than I would have been at 0-1. And luckily now I'm 1-1.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you look back at your martial arts journey overall, like how do you feel? Did you have you achieved everything that you set out to achieve, or how do you reflect on your journey?
Well, no, I don't. I could live to be 500, and I'll never achieve all that I set out to achieve, especially in martial arts, because there's, part of the beauty of martial arts is there's always more to learn. There's always ways to make yourself better. There's always ways to grow. You never know it all. You're never done, and you can keep learning. The only thing that limits you is yourself. If you close yourself off, then you're done. So there's more things I would love to do. There's just so much more to be done. Um, so no, I'm not done, but I'm going to keep training till I draw my last breath. Like I said, I'm 65 years old. I'm healthy. I'm in good shape. I train literally every day.
Wow.
And I'm not going to ever stop, because on the selfish side of things, for me personally, it helps me. It makes me feel better. It brings me peace. It makes me feel better physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. And it also, I've only got a few students, but as long as I keep growing and I keep improving, then I can keep giving to my students, and I can keep helping them. And I've just recently started doing a Zoom class for a lot of my students, or a few of my students that are scattered around the country, that had kind of fallen away from training, and had a few times said, "Hey, can you do something? We want to train, but training by ourselves is really difficult." And so I've got about a dozen people or so that I'm working with on Zoom, and so I can give back. And several of them have told me, "Hey, this is great. It makes me feel good. My life is crazy, but this is something that I can do makes that craziness not so crazy. And so to me, that's, giving back. The martial arts saved my life, literally. I know I would be either dead, in jail, or an addict, or any combination of the above if I didn't have martial arts to bring me through. I lost a child in 1996, and I held him in my arms and I put him in a box, and the anniversary of that date is coming up here in just a little while this month. And I still have the memories of that fresh in my mind, even though it was 25 years ago. I can still see him. I can still remember the day. I can remember carrying him in the box, putting him in the frozen ground. So to me, when something like that happens, you have to have something to lift you up and something to pour yourself into. If I didn't have that, if I didn't have martial arts to pour myself into, that would have been the end of me. I would have never survived that. I was an abused kid. I was badly abused by a stepfather. He beat my ass like I was some kind of a dog. He sexually abused me. How do you get through that kind of stuff if you don't have something to throw yourself into, to focus energy on, and to get some goodness and some positivity out of? And for me, that was martial arts. Different people have different things, different ways that they can survive. For me, it was martial arts. And if I didn't have martial arts, if I didn't have great teachers, if I didn't have great students, I know I'd be dead now. There's no doubt. Or I might as well be dead, because I'd be some worthless addict or drunk laying in a ditch, being just a pissy ass mean person. But I'm not. I survived, and that martial arts is the number one reason why. I believe that we're always given a way out of no matter how bad things get in life. There are things and people that are put there for us. And for me, I'm convinced that martial arts was put there, and this is your way out. This is your way to not only survive, but to actually grow and get better and give back to other people.
Fantastic. That's a great message, really. So are you involved in MMA at all? Do you follow the current product, and what do you think of the state of the sport at the moment?
Oh yeah, I follow it as much as I can. I just watched one of the most brilliant performances last night that I've ever seen, Max Holloway.
Yeah, it was unreal.
Oh God. And I've always loved Max Holloway. He seems, I don't know him personally, but he seems like such a decent human being, hard worker, well-rounded fighter. But what he did last night to a really tough guy, man, oh man, I don't know if I've ever seen anything better than that. I mean, he was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So I like to follow it. I did have a fight team for a few years here in Kansas City, and it slowly dwindled. I haven't had anybody fight now for probably 2 or 3 years, other than one guy who came back and did a kickboxing match, but he was a great MMA guy. He was 10-0 as an amateur, 1-0 as a pro, but life kind of got in his way. I shouldn't say it got in his way, because life got in the way of martial arts. He's got 4 beautiful kids and a wonderful wife and a great career, so he's doing great. But he was the guy that I think could have really made some noise in the big shows. I've had a couple other guys who had potential. One guy who made it to Bellator, fought a couple of Bellator fights. Not when he was still with me. He moved away, originally on, I think, to Portland, Oregon, and now he's in Las Vegas. It was having a fight team was fun. It was challenging. We did really, really well for a while, especially in the beginning. Kind of nerve-wracking when you're the head coach and the corner guy, and you want the best for your guys. And I get attached to people when they come to me and they give so much. I mean, we sweat together, we bleed together, we get exhausted together. We're shoulder to shoulder and back to back. To me, they're family, and when they get in there, it's like my anxiety level goes way up, because it's like, man, I want the best for these guys, and they'll when they're in there, it's like, oh man, don't. But they did really well. Some of them almost gave me heart failure, but they did good.
You hear a lot of trainers say that they get more nervous when their students fight than when they fight themselves.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, at least, especially for me. I several years ago, I did a lot of judging and a lot of refereeing in regional shows and local shows up in Minnesota, North Dakota, Iowa, even a little bit in Canada. But as MMA grew and commissions took over, that was kind of about the time I moved down to Kansas City, and I just kind of got out of that end of it. I regret that, because I enjoyed it, especially enjoyed refereeing, even though it is really a tough job. People don't realize what a really, really tough job refereeing is. It's easy to sit back and say, oh, that ref, he screwed that up, he shouldn't have done this. But when you're in there, you see things that no matter how good the picture is on the TV or how big your screen is, you don't see the guy's eyes, you don't see the guy's body language, you don't hear what they're sounding like when you're in there, and you have to make real quick decisions on the spot, and you have to protect the fighter, and it's a hard job, but it was fun. I enjoyed it.
Absolutely. So would you say your focus now is back on the traditional martial arts?
Yeah, my focus never went away from that. I just added MMA to it. So that's one reason why I've got to train every day, is because I don't want to let anything slip. So I'm up at 4:30 in the morning so I can start training and take care of myself. And then I go to the gym in the evening. And if I'm not in the gym, if it's not one of my evenings in the gym, then I come home and I train again on my own at home. So I'm focusing more on that now than I was, as far as the ratio of how much I'm focusing on traditional as opposed to MMA. I've only got just a very small group of students here in Kansas City right now. Nobody's fighting right now. I got a kid who is 16 years old, and I was thinking about getting out of teaching the MMA and just teaching the karate and then training in different places with other people for the MMA. But turns out this kid is really getting a lot out of it. And his dad approached me and said, hey, you're really helping this son of mine. He's had some hard times, and he really gets a lot out of this, and he really looks up to you. And it's like, oh man, I can't quit. So I gotta keep training. I mean, he's really good too. He's an interesting kid. He's real quiet. But he's like a sponge. He takes in everything you give him, and he hit a growth spurt, and he's getting big, and he can really crack. He's good. And he picks up the ground game real fast too. And I've got a couple more guys, but I think the kid needs me more than anybody. So
yeah, great. So what's your situation now? Like work, family, living arrangements? What are you up to these days outside of fighting?
I still work full time, and I'm a salaried employee, so I put in way more than 40 hours a week most times. I work for the Salvation Army. We just got through a Christmas season here, and that's a crazy time for the Salvation Army because we're so busy. We give away, well over 1,000, between 1,000, close to 2,000 food parcels. We have the bell ringers with the kettles. We have so many things going on, and the weather can be kind of touchy. And my job is one of those jobs where you're kind of involved with just about everything that goes on. So it's really, really busy. I'd like to retire, but having been a martial arts bum my whole life, that doesn't lead itself to good retirement plans. I never put anything away for retirement. I never stuck with one job long enough to build up any retirement. So I don't really have anything. So I'm still working. My wife, she's a lot smarter than I am. She's she kept the same job for 28 years or so, and she retired from the National Guard, and she's the stable one of the two of us, and she's always been smarter. We've been together since I moved down here in 2004. So she's going to retire on the 1st of March, but I'll probably keep working because I don't want to take advantage of her. I want to pay my own way. Like I said, still teaching 3 nights a week. I train with another group 1 day a week. I work out on my own at home 7 days a week. My children are grown. I've got beautiful grandkids that live way too far away. I never get to see them. Hardly get to see my son. But life is good. I'm healthy. I can't complain. I do things that not a whole lot of 65-year-olds do. And I'm thankful for that. I'm grateful. I don't take it for granted. I'm thankful for all of the gifts and the blessings that I have. Hopefully I can keep doing what I do and keep giving back.
Fantastic. No, it's great to hear. So is there anything that you want to promote, anyone you want to thank or shout out before we wrap up?
Well, that would take an awful long time. You don't live to be this old without having a whole lot of people to thank for so many things. And I hate to even start because I'll forget people.
Yep.
As far as martial arts go, my teachers passed away in Okinawa. He was the biggest influence on me. His name was Mr. Kuda. I always have to thank Pat Miletich for the MMA side of things, for taking me under his wing when it wasn't a popular thing to do, for having always treated me so good and taught me so much. Would have liked to have spent more time with him, but the time that I had with him was very influential. My wife, my family, all of my students, karate students, MMA students, I don't think they could possibly know how much that they've done for me. Frequently they thank me for doing things for them, but they lifted me up, took me on their shoulders, and carried me a lot more than they know. So yeah, I don't know. There's been so many people that have been so good to me over the years that I just hope that they all know that I'm very, very grateful for all of them.
Fantastic. No, that's great. So yeah, I think that's probably a good way to cap it off. Fred, thank you so much for stopping by and taking some time out of your day to talk to me. Yeah, I really, really appreciate it.
Super. My pleasure.